WHFS Bethesda, Maryland. My name's Thomas, and my guest is John Sebastian.
Good evening. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay. You're playing tonight at the Bayou. You're back out on the road, doing gigs. Where you been?
Well, I've been mostly in New York City this past year, or upstate New York, mostly concentrating on some writing and a play project, which has really been interesting. And kind of took a delightful year or so, not on the road a lot. I played a little East Coast gigs and several benefits, but really didn't do any here he is kind of shows for a while.
Yeah, I believe I saw you on the Mud Acres album, on one of the Woodstock Review albums, doing some harp work.
Yeah.
And that's probably the last thing that you've done since the Cotter album, right?
Yes, indeed. That and some other studio work. I played on Randy Van Warmer's record, Just When I Needed You Most, and a couple of other things, varying between auto harp and harmonica and drums, which is my new pet instrument.
Well, let's listen to something from the Welcome Back album. I like Most Likely You'll Go Your Way and I'll Go Mine. It has the Poison Ivy riff at the beginning, and then it's sort of like a Johnny Cash thing.
Just fine.
All right, we're back. This is WHFS Bethesda, Maryland. We're talking to John Sebastian. I think the first time I ever saw you was on the Lloyd Thaxton show. Do you remember that far back?
Oh, sure. The Spoonful played the absolute, every single one of those TV shows, the little local rock and roll shows of that period. It was hilarious.
I understand the Spoonful almost got back together.
No, we did get back together and had a delicious 4 or 5 days at the Concord Hotel with Paul Simon making his movie, and did a terrific show there, which was well documented on film and tape, and presumably within the year will be a movie.
Why do you think that you guys split?
Well, it was just a matter of chemistry, I guess. Over the years, we gained perspective about these things, and I think that the guys in the band and I have all had time to talk about it and reflect and so on. I think that there were a lot of things at play during that period, but most obviously the fact that after 4 or 5 years we didn't feel like doing it the same way, and as we started changing members and juggling this and juggling that, the original chemistry was no longer there, and at that point we stopped rather than take the long route down, which I don't regret for a minute.
You worked as a guitar apprentice for a while, and then you were going to go into sales, and then got back into music. What's that about?
Gee, I don't know. You must have your hands on an ancient biography or something. There was a fragment of time during one summer when I was working at Ted Hood's up in Maine, but I never really made it into the sail loft. I wanted to, but I spent the summer sanding boat bottoms. The other thing you mentioned, working in guitar shops, was something that started really interesting me at the point at which I started wanting to be able to fix my guitars, which was about 2 or 3 years after I bought my guitars. And so I worked as an apprentice at a small classical guitar shop, started repairing steel-strung instruments, and to this day I'm only a mediocre but still able guitar repairman.
Let's listen to some Lovin Spoonful music.
With pleasure.
All right. This is WHFS Bethesda, Maryland. My name's Thomas, and my guest is John Sebastian, who is at the Bayou tonight. When the Spoonful did break up, when Zal left, then you had Jerry Yester for a while, and then Joe Butler continued with an album in 1969, Revelation.
Well, for about 20 minutes, I think. It wasn't really too concentrated an effort.
No. You made it through the 60s, and now we're into 1980. What do you think's ahead?
Well, I think that each of us will find out what's ahead. I'm not the man to predict what's ahead. I know that for myself, I have some exciting prospects of working in some areas that I haven't worked in, and that it's very nice to have a few new dragons to slay. You wake up every morning and you go in, there's the same goddamn dragon, and it sometimes is a big bore. And this musical that I've been working on that will go into production this fall has really occupied my thoughts and efforts over the last 6-8 months, and so that's, I guess, the focus of my attention, and I do find it refreshing to have a different area to look forward to.
You played on Deja with Crosby, Stills, Nash Young. How did that come about?
Gee, that's a long time ago. It came about because we were all hanging out together. Crosby, Stills, and Nash really materialized in my living room and Paul Rothchild's living room, and rehearsed at my house in Long Island at the time. So we sort of had our coming up together. In fact, I suggested Dallas Taylor for that band, and at one time was offered the drum seat in that group. I couldn't take it because my solo career was just blossoming, but there's many a slip twixt the cup and the lip.
Another great concept album was The Four of Us.
Well, thank you very much. Very unrecognized, but always appreciated when you say that.
And from listening to it, I would imagine you took a trip across country.
That's right. It was a lovely trip that my wife and I and 2 other people took that produced that record.
You still have your dog, John?
I have always had dogs. I'm quite sure I don't have the same dog that you might be thinking of, but dogs are a sort of a sustaining interest in my life, it seems.
So now when you're playing in concert, I'm sure you have quite a repertoire with what you're playing. Would you like to let us in on some of the material that we'd be hearing?
Well, the nice thing about working by yourself is that you don't have to plan sets, and I think that I look forward to the fact of the audience involvement sometimes giving me a clue as to what to do, and I like to leave room for that. Well, basically all it really is that I have been a songwriter for a long time, and people know my songs in various contexts, but they're all my songs, so I can play any of them with great pleasure.
You worked with Woody Allen on a film score.
Well, I didn't work with him directly. I never met him, as it turned out, but I did do the score for one of his earlier efforts, and it was a terrific project.
On your first solo album, it had 2 covers. Why is that?
The first solo album was first put out by MGM. Or no, actually it was withheld by MGM for about 1.5 years while they said, well, this is Spoonful product. I said, no, stay current now. This is a solo album of mine. And they refused to put it out, and after a certain amount of time, I went to Warner Brothers and said, how about this great album? So they put it out, and then MGM put it out as a sort of an afterthought, gee, we changed our mind kind of thing. So it was in fact sort of second generation and not nearly as good a print. But these are the mechanics of what happens when you vacillate between being in and out of demand, as everybody does, and record companies very often have to sort of eat their words.
You also worked with Freddie Neal on a couple of his records.
Yes, indeed. That was where I really had my coming up in harmonica playing. Fred put me in the right spot in a group of his, and I worked for several years in that group, on and off.
Thank you very much for talking to me, and I hope people go down to the Bayou and see you.
Well, thank you very much. I'd like to invite him down myself.